An elderly millionaire was having a coffee in the cafeteria and was alerted by a beggar boy who said, "Your son is stealing from you." At that moment, he still didn't believe it, so he took the boy to his mansion and began to investigate. What he discovered made his eyes fill with tears. Watch until the end to see the outcome of this story. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel, don't forget to like this video, and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Maxwell's coffee house, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. In his usual corner booth, Richard Montgomery, founder and CEO of Montgomery Enterprises, sat alone with his steaming cup of artisanal coffee. At 78, his once jet-black hair had turned silver, but his steel-blue eyes retained the sharp intensity that had helped him build his business empire from scratch. The cafe buzzed with the usual morning crowd, young professionals tapping away on laptops, business meetings conducted in hushed tones, and the constant hiss of the espresso machine. Richard barely noticed any of it anymore. This had been his morning ritual for the past 30 years, a moment of solitude before facing the day's challenges at the corporate headquarters across the street. He was reviewing the latest quarterly reports when something unusual caught his attention. A young boy no more than 12 stood at the edge of his table. The child's clothes were worn, his feet bare, and his face bore traces of dirt. But what struck Richard most was the intelligent gleam in the boy's eyes. The cafe's patrons had already begun to stare, and Marcus, Richard's regular server, was hurrying over with an apologetic expression. But before anyone could intervene, the boy spoke in a clear, steady voice that belied his appearance. "Mr. Montgomery, your son is trying to take over your company." The words hung in the air like suspended crystal, threatening to shatter the peaceful morning atmosphere. Richard lowered his reading glasses, studying the boy's face with newfound interest. In his decades of business, he had learned to trust his instincts about people, and something about this child's earnest expression made him pause. "And how would you know that?" Richard asked quietly, gesturing for Marcus to stand down. The boy glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "I heard him in here yesterday evening. He was on the phone talking about some kind of emergency board meeting. He said something about proving you're not fit to run the company anymore." Richard's hand tightened imperceptibly around his coffee cup. The words struck a chord with recent events he'd been trying to ignore, the mysterious postponements of key meetings, the subtle questioning of his decisions by board members who had never challenged him before, and most troublingly, his son Michael's increasing insistence on handling all major financial decisions. "Sit down," Richard said, pushing a chair out with his foot. "Tell me everything you heard." As the boy settled into the chair, Richard noticed how he sat straight-backed, hands folded neatly on the table despite his disheveled appearance. He began to speak in a low, measured voice, recounting a conversation he'd overheard while seeking shelter in the cafe's bathroom the previous evening. The details were precise. Numbers, dates, names of board members. This was no random accusation or attempt at extortion. The boy described overhearing Michael's phone conversation about doctored competency evaluations, manipulated financial reports, and a carefully orchestrated plan to present Richard as an aging leader losing his grip on reality. With each word, Richard felt the weight of denial lifting from his shoulders, replaced by a cold clarity. He had built Montgomery Enterprises from nothing, turning a small software company into a global technology giant. Along the way, he had navigated hostile takeover attempts, market crashes, and countless competitors, but never had he imagined his greatest threat would come from within his own family. "What's your name?" Richard asked when the boy finished speaking. "Tommy," the child replied, fidgeting slightly under Richard's intense gaze. "And why are you telling me this, Tommy?" The boy's answer came without hesitation. "Because it's not right. My dad always said that families should stick together, help each other, not this." Richard leaned back, considering the irony of receiving such a fundamental lesson in family. Values from a homeless child. The morning crowd had thinned, and through the windows he could see the Montgomery Enterprises tower gleaming in the distance, 90 stories of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the sky itself. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "James, bring the car around and cancel my morning meetings." Turning back to Tommy, he asked, "Would you like some breakfast? We have a lot to discuss and I never could think straight on an empty stomach." The boy's eyes widened slightly, but he maintained his composure. As Marcus approached with menus, Richard found himself studying Tommy's face, wondering what twist of fate had brought this unlikely messenger into his life at precisely the right moment. Over plates of eggs, Benedict and fresh orange juice, Tommy's story began to take shape. With even greater detail, Richard listened intently, his breakfast growing cold as the boy described snippets of conversation he'd overheard. Not just from Michael, but from other executives who frequented Maxwell's coffee house after hours when they thought no one was listening. "They mentioned something about offshore accounts," Tommy said, carefully cutting his eggs into precise triangles. "And someone named Harrison kept saying they needed to move faster before you noticed the discrepancies in the quarterly reports." Richard's jaw tightened. Harrison Walsh had been his CFO for 15 years, a man he'd trusted with not just his company's finances, but with personal investment decisions as well. The betrayal stung, but it also helped explain the subtle irregularities he'd noticed in recent financial statements, discrepancies that Harrison had dismissed as accounting updates to comply with new regulations. As they talked, Richard's town car waited outside, its tinted windows reflecting the growing morning traffic. Inside the cafe, the breakfast rush had subsided, leaving them in relative privacy. Richard found himself impressed not just by Tommy's recall, but by his intuitive understanding of the situation. "You seem to know a lot about business for someone your age," Richard observed. Tommy shrugged, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. "My dad was an accountant. He taught me about numbers, about business. He said understanding money was important, but being honest was more important." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "Where is he now?" "Gone," Tommy replied simply, turning his attention back to his plate. Richard nodded, recognizing the boundary in the boy's response. Instead of pressing, he shifted the conversation back to Michael and the impending takeover attempt. "When did you first start noticing these meetings?" "About 3 weeks ago," Tommy answered. "They always come in late after most people leave. They think no one can hear them in the back booth, but sound carries in here at night when it's quiet." Richard pulled out his tablet and began making notes. The timeline aligned perfectly with several suspicious events: the sudden resignation of his longtime personal assistant, the mysterious computer glitch that had locked him out of certain financial records, and Michael's insistence on relocating the upcoming board meeting to an unusual venue. "Mr. Montgomery," Tommy said suddenly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "there's something else. Yesterday, I heard them talking about some kind of meeting tomorrow. They said it was their last chance before the quarterly shareholders' call." Richard's fingers froze over the tablet. The quarterly shareholders' meeting was indeed scheduled for the day after tomorrow, a meeting he had been persuaded to attend, virtually rather than in person, allegedly due to a technical upgrade in the conference room. "They're moving faster than I thought," Richard murmured, more to himself than to Tommy. He looked up at the boy, who was watching him with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "Thank you, Tommy. You've done me a great service." Tommy straightened in his chair. "What are you going to do?" "First," Richard said, closing his tablet, "I'm going to make some calls. Then, I'm going to need your help with something else, if you're willing." "What kind of help?" Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I need someone they don't know, someone they won't suspect to be my eyes and ears, someone who can move around unnoticed and report back to me. Would you be interested in that job?" Tommy's eyes lit up with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "Like a secret agent?" "More like a special consultant," Richard corrected with a slight smile. "Of course, this position would come with certain benefits: proper clothes, a safe place to stay, and a fair compensation for your time." The boy's expression turned serious. "I don't want charity, Mr. Montgomery. I want to earn my way." Richard felt a surge of respect for the child's dignity. "This isn't charity, Tommy. This is a business proposition. I need someone I can trust, someone with your particular talents for observation and analysis. In return, I'm offering you an opportunity to build a better future for yourself. Do we have a deal?" Tommy considered the offer for a long moment, his young face contemplative. Finally, he extended his hand across the table. "Deal." As Richard shook the small hand, he couldn't help but notice the contrast between this boy's integrity and his own son's duplicity. Outside, the morning sun had climbed higher, casting new shadows across the city streets. In the Montgomery Enterprises tower, Michael would be arriving at his office, unaware that his carefully constructed plan was about to unravel. The Montgomery Enterprises tower cast a long shadow over the financial district as Richard's town car pulled into the private underground garage. Tommy, now dressed in new clothes from a hasty shopping trip, sat beside him, taking in everything with keen interest. The boy's transformation was remarkable. Cleaned up and properly dressed, he could easily pass for the son of any of the executives who worked in the building. "Remember the plan," Richard said as they stepped into his private elevator. "You're my grandson from my late daughter Sarah, here for a brief visit. The security team has been briefed, and your temporary access card will let you move freely through the building." Tommy nodded, touching the access card in his pocket. "And I should pay special attention to the conference rooms on the executive floor, especially when Mr. Michael is having meetings." "Exactly, but be careful. Harrison Walsh, my CFO, is particularly observant. Try to avoid his notice." The elevator doors opened directly into Richard's penthouse office suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while priceless art adorned the walls. But Richard noticed Tommy's attention was drawn to the scale model of Montgomery Enterprises' first computer chip, the innovation that had launched the company 30 years ago. "You built this?" Tommy asked, studying the model with genuine curiosity. "In my garage," Richard confirmed. "Everyone said it couldn't compete with the bigger companies, but sometimes the biggest advantage is having nothing to lose." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Richard's new assistant, Jennifer, entered with a stack of files. "Mr. Montgomery, the executive committee is gathering for the pre-meeting briefing. Mr. Walsh specifically requested your presence." "Did he now?" Richard exchanged a knowing look with Tommy. "Very well. Tommy, why don't you explore the building while I attend to this? Jennifer will show you to the company museum on the 20th floor. I think you'll find it interesting." As Tommy left with Jennifer, Richard gathered his thoughts. The executive committee meeting would be his first face-to-face encounter with the conspirators since learning of their plan. He needed to play his cards carefully to let them think their scheme was still secret while gathering more evidence. The conference room was already full when Richard arrived. Michael sat at the far end of the table, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his expression carefully neutral. Harrison Walsh stood near the windows, speaking quietly into his phone. Other board members and executives filled the remaining seats, their conversations hushing as Richard entered. "Good morning, everyone," Richard said cheerfully, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I hear we have some urgent matters to discuss." Michael cleared his throat. "Yes, Father. We've been reviewing the quarterly projections and there are some concerns about market volatility. Harrison has prepared a detailed analysis." Harrison stepped forward, clicking through a series of complex charts on the presentation screen. "As you can see, our exposure in certain markets has increased significantly. Given the current economic climate, we believe immediate action is necessary to protect shareholder interests." Richard listened carefully, noting how the presentation subtly emphasized risks while downplaying the company's strong fundamentals. It was skillfully done. Any casual observer would think they were simply being prudent, not setting the stage for a corporate coup. "Interesting analysis," Richard said when Harrison finished. "Though I notice it doesn't include our new quantum computing division's projections. Surely that would offset some of these concerns." A flicker of surprise crossed Harrison's face. The quantum computing project was supposed to be confidential, part of Richard's long-term strategy that even Michael didn't know about yet. "I wasn't aware that project had moved beyond the research phase," Michael interjected smoothly. "Perhaps we should discuss resource allocation for such speculative ventures." "Oh, it's well beyond speculation," Richard replied, enjoying the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. In fact, I have a meeting with the development team this afternoon. Would you like to join us, Michael? See the future of the company firsthand." Michael's smile tightened. "Unfortunately, I have other commitments, but I'm sure you can fill me in later." The meeting continued, a careful dance of proposals and counter-proposals. Richard played along, watching how his son and Harrison exchanged glances when they thought he wasn't looking. He appeared to accept their suggestions while subtly steering the conversation away from any binding decisions. As the meeting wound down, Richard caught a glimpse of Tommy through the conference room's glass walls, apparently lost and studying a directory board. The boy's performance was perfect, just another kid waiting for a parent, nothing to draw attention. But Richard noticed how Tommy's eyes darted periodically to Michael's tablet, left carelessly open on the conference table. "Well, I think that covers everything," Harrison said, gathering his papers. "Though we should schedule a follow-up to finalize the restructuring proposals before the shareholders' meeting." "Of course," Richard agreed amicably, "though I was thinking we might move the shareholders' meeting back to the main conference room. These technical upgrades seem to be taking longer than expected." Michael's head snapped up. "The alternate venue is already arranged, Father. Changing it now would create unnecessary complications." "Nonsense," Richard waved his hand dismissively. "I'll have it expedite the upgrades. A company of our size should have its shareholders' meeting in its own building, don't you think?" He could almost see the calculations running behind Michael's eyes, the hasty revisions to carefully laid plans. But before his son could argue further, Richard stood up, effectively ending the discussion. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe my grandson is waiting for me. Family lunch and all that, you understand." As Richard left the conference room, he could feel the tension he'd left in his wake. The first moves in this corporate chess game had been made, and he'd managed to disrupt their carefully orchestrated plan without revealing his knowledge. But this was just the beginning. The real challenge would come at tomorrow's shareholders' meeting. Tommy was waiting by the elevators when Richard emerged from the conference room. The boy's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes held a hint of excitement that told Richard he'd discovered something significant. They maintained their casual demeanor until they were safely enclosed in Richard's private elevator. "They have a whole set of different financial reports," Tommy burst out as soon as the doors closed. "While you were in the meeting, I saw Mr. Walsh's assistant printing documents in the copy room. The numbers are completely different from what they showed you." Richard pressed the button for his private floor. "Did you get a good look at them?" "Better." Tommy pulled out his phone, another recent acquisition, and showed Richard several carefully framed photos. "I pretended to be playing games while waiting near the printer. The assistant didn't even notice me." Richard studied the photos with growing concern. The documents showed systematic manipulation of the company's financial projections, carefully designed to paint a picture of impending crisis that only Michael's aggressive new leadership could solve. "There's more," Tommy continued as they entered Richard's office. "I overheard Michael on his phone when he left the conference room. He's meeting someone named Elena for lunch at Bella Luna restaurant. He said something about making sure all the votes are lined up for tomorrow." "Elena." "Blackwood," Richard muttered. "She represents our largest institutional investor." He sat heavily in his chair, the weight of the betrayal settling more firmly on his shoulders. Eleanor had been a trusted ally for years, helping him fight off several hostile takeover attempts. If Michael had managed to turn her... "What are we going to do?" Tommy asked, perching on the edge of a leather chair. Richard's eyes traveled to the wall of photographs behind his desk, images chronicling the company's history. There was Michael as a boy, proudly holding the newspaper announcing Montgomery Enterprises' IPO. Another showed him graduating from business school, Richard's arm around his shoulders, both of them beaming with pride and possibility. "We're going to have lunch," Richard said finally, turning back to Tommy, "at Bella Luna." The upscale Italian restaurant was crowded when Richard and Tommy arrived, but the maitre d' immediately led them to Richard's regular table, which, not coincidentally, offered a clear view of the private dining room where Michael was meeting. "Helena Blackwood, your usual Pellegrino, Mr. Montgomery?" the waiter asked. "Yes, and a lemonade for my young friend here." Richard opened his menu. though his attention was focused on the partially visible figures through the frosted glass partition. "Tell me, Tommy, what do you think makes someone betray their own family?" Tommy considered the question while studying his menu. Maybe they forget it's betrayal. Maybe they tell themselves they're doing the right thing even when they know they're not. Richard nodded thoughtfully. "When I started this company, Michael was just a boy. He used to sit in my office, after school doing his homework while I worked. Sometimes when I had late meetings, he'd fall asleep on the office couch. I'd carry him to the car, and he'd wake up just enough to ask if we'd won whatever deal I was working on." What changed? Success. Perhaps, or maybe I did. Richard's voice grew contemplative. I was so focused on building something that would last, something I could pass on to him, that I forgot to make sure he understood what really mattered. Their conversation paused as the waiter returned with their drinks. Through the partition, Richard could see Michael gesturing emphatically, while Eleanor nodded, her expression serious. On the table between them lay a thick folder, undoubtedly containing the manufactured evidence of Richard's supposed incompetence. "Sir," Tommy said suddenly, his voice low but urgent, "look at Ms. Blackwood's face. She doesn't seem happy with whatever Mr. Michael is saying." Richard studied Elena more carefully. Tommy was right, there was a tension in her posture, a slight frown that suggested skepticism rather than agreement. As they watched, she shook her head firmly and began gathering her things. Michael reached across the table, his expression pleading, but Elena stood up, clutching her designer handbag. She emerged from the private dining room with quick steps, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. As she passed their table, she noticed Richard and froze. "Richard," she said, composure briefly cracking, I didn't expect to see you here." "Elena," Richard replied calmly, "lovely day for a business lunch, isn't it?" She glanced back at the private dining room, where Michael was now visible in the doorway, his face pale. "Richard, we need to talk. Not here, but soon. There are things you should know." "I believe I already do," Richard said softly. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Elena's eyes darted to Tommy, then back to Richard. Something seemed to settle in her expression. "The right thing," she said firmly. "Finally." With that, she turned and strode out of the restaurant, leaving Michael staring after her in barely concealed panic. "I think," Richard said to Tommy, picking up his menu again, "we should try the pasta special. We have a big day ahead of us tomorrow, and I've always found Italian food excellent for strategic planning." The sun was setting over the city skyline when Richard's private elevator opened into his penthouse apartment. The vast living space, occupying the top floor of his residential building, offered a panoramic view of the urban landscape he'd helped shape over the decades. Tommy stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, mesmerized by the golden light reflecting off countless glass surfaces. "I've arranged for you to stay in the guest suite tonight," Richard said, loosening his tie. "Tomorrow's going to be a crucial day, and I want you close by." The boy turned from the window, his expression serious beyond his years. "Do you think Elena will help us?" Her leaving that lunch meeting was certainly a good sign. Richard walked to a seemingly ordinary wall panel and pressed his palm against it. The panel slid aside, revealing a high-tech home office. "But we can't rely on that alone. We need to be prepared for every possibility." Tommy followed him into the office, his eyes widening at the advanced displays and computing equipment. "This looks like something from a spy movie." Richard chuckled. "When you've been in business as long as I have, you learn to keep certain tools close at hand." He sat at the main console and began pulling up files. "Now let's review what we know." Over the next hour, they organized their evidence. Tommy's photographs of the altered financial reports, security footage from the building showing late-night meetings between Michael and various board members, and records of suspicious financial transactions that Richard had quietly gathered through his own channels. "The quantum computing division," Tommy said suddenly. "You mentioned it in the meeting today. Is it real?" Richard's eyes twinkled. "Very real and much further along than Michael suspects. In fact," he typed a command, and a holographic display sprang to life in the center of the room, showing complex technical schematics. "We're on the verge of a breakthrough that could revolutionize the entire industry. That's why the timing of their plan is so important, Tommy realized. Once this becomes public, the company's value would skyrocket, Richard confirmed. Making any takeover attempt much more difficult, he turned to face Tommy directly, which is why tomorrow's shareholders' meeting is critical. Michael doesn't just want control of what the company is now, he wants control of what it's about to become. Their strategy session was interrupted by Richard's secure phone line. The caller ID showed Elena Blackwood's number. Richard activated the speaker and encryption protocols before answering. "Elena, I was hoping to hear from you." "Richard." Her voice was tense. "I've just spent 2 hours reviewing everything Michael showed me today. The manipulations are extensive. He's been planning this for months, maybe longer." "I suspected as much. The question is, what are you planning to do with this information?" There was a long pause. "I've already done it. I've sent documentation to all major shareholders detailing the discrepancies I've found. Michael's entire case rests on proving you're unfit to lead, but his own actions prove something very different." Richard exchanged a satisfied look with Tommy. "Thank you, Elena. I know this couldn't have been an easy decision." "It was easier than you might think," she replied. "I've watched you build this company with integrity for 20 years. I'm not about to let it be torn apart by lies." She hesitated. "But Richard, be careful. Michael wasn't happy when I left that restaurant. He's been making calls all afternoon. Whatever he's planning for tomorrow, I don't think he's going to go down without a fight." After ending the call, Richard sat in thoughtful silence. Tommy watched him, sensing the weight of what was to come. "He's still your son," the boy said quietly. Richard's eyes drifted to a family photo on his desk, Michael as a teenager, grinning proudly next to his father at a company celebration. "Yes, he is, which makes tomorrow all the more difficult." Rising from his chair, Richard walked to a small safe hidden behind an abstract painting. He opened it and removed a leather-bound journal. "This is the original business plan for Montgomery Enterprises," he explained, handling the book with reverence. "I wrote it 30 years ago when all I had was an idea and the determination to make it real." He opened to a dog-eared page and read aloud, "This company will be built on 3 principles: innovation, integrity, and the understanding that true success comes not from what we take, but from what we create." Tommy moved closer, studying the handwritten words. "Those are good principles." "They are," Richard agreed, "and tomorrow we're going to fight to preserve them." He checked his watch. "But first, we need rest and dinner. I believe I promised you my chef's famous lasagna." As they left the office, Richard's phone buzzed with an urgent message from his security team. Michael had just entered the building, heading for the executive floor. The night, it seemed, was not over yet. "Change of plans," Richard said, his voice grave. "I think it's time for a father-son talk." He turned to Tommy. "Would you mind having dinner in your suite? I believe my son and I need to have a private conversation." Tommy nodded solemnly. "Be careful, Mr. Montgomery." "Always am, my boy. Always am." Richard straightened his tie and headed for the elevator. The confrontation he'd been avoiding was about to begin, and he needed to face it with the same courage he'd used to build his empire. The executive floor was dimly lit when Richard stepped out of the elevator, the city lights outside casting long shadows through the windows. He could see Michael's silhouette in his office, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. For a moment, Richard was struck by how much his son's stance reminded him of himself in younger days, when he would walk these same floors late at night, wrestling with difficult decisions. "I figured you'd come down," Michael said without turning as Richard entered the office. "Eleanor called you, didn't she?" "She did." Richard closed the door behind him. "Though I already knew most of it." Michael finally turned, his expression a complex mixture of anger, determination, and something else, perhaps regret. "How long?" "Long enough." Richard moved to the window, standing shoulder to shoulder with his son, both of them looking out at the city they'd helped build. "The question is, how long have you been planning this?" Planning what exactly? Michael's tone was defensive. Planning to save the company from becoming obsolete? Planning to modernize our approach before we lose everything you built? Is that really how you see it? Richard asked quietly. Or is that just what you tell yourself to justify what you're doing? Michael's reflection in the window showed a flicker of uncertainty before his jaw set stubbornly. The board agrees with me. The company needs new leadership, fresh ideas. You're still running things like it's 1995. Am I? Richard turned to face his son directly. Tell me, what do you know about Project Quantum? The question caught Michael off guard. The research initiative, it's a waste of resources. We should be focusing on proven technologies, not pipe dreams. Richard smiled sadly. That pipe dream is about to revolutionize computing as we know it. But you were too busy plotting my removal to notice what was happening in your own company. Oh, you're bluffing, Michael said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Am I? Richard pulled out his phone and pulled up the quantum computing project's latest test results. Tomorrow, after the shareholders' meeting, we were going to announce the successful completion of Phase 3. Our stock value would likely triple overnight. Michael studied the data, his face paling slightly. Why didn't you tell me about this? I tried, multiple times, but you were always too busy with your own agenda, too convinced you knew better. Richard pocketed his phone. When was the last time you actually visited the R&D department, Michael? When was the last time you talked to our engineers about their dreams for the future, not just their quarterly targets? Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that reminded Richard painfully of Michael's mother. That's not fair. I've been working to protect this company's future. No, Richard said firmly. You've been working to take control of it. There's a difference. He moved to Michael's desk and picked up a framed photo, Michael's graduation, from business school. Do you remember what I told you that day? Michael's voice was barely audible. That the company would be mine someday. I said it would be yours when you were ready. Richard set the photo down carefully. Not when you managed to take it, but when you understood what it truly means to lead. And you get to decide when that is. Michael's anger flared again. I'm not a child anymore, Father. I've earned this. Earned it? Richard's voice sharpened. By falsifying reports? By manipulating board members? By trying to convince everyone I'm mentally unfit? He pulled out several documents from his jacket. These are the real numbers, Michael. The ones you've been hiding. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Michael stared at the papers, his facade finally cracking. You don't understand the pressure, the expectations, everyone always comparing me to you, waiting for me to fail. So you decided to prove them right? Richard's tone softened. Son, I never wanted you to be me. I wanted you to be better than me. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of unspoken words. Outside, the city continued its endless dance of lights and shadows, unaware of the drama unfolding in the tower above. It's not too late to stop this, Richard said finally. We can find a way forward together. Michael turned back to the window, his reflection showing the internal struggle playing across his features. When he spoke, his voice was cold and determined. No, I've committed too much to this. The shareholders. Meeting goes forward tomorrow as planned. Richard sighed heavily. Then you leave me no choice. He moved toward the door but paused in the doorway. You know, your mother always said you had my determination. She just hoped you'd also have her wisdom. Leave her out of this, Michael snapped. As you wish. Richard's hand rested on the door handle. But remember, son, tomorrow, when all this comes to a head, it didn't have to be this way. As the elevator doors closed behind him, Richard felt the weight of what was to come settling onto his shoulders. Tomorrow would determine not just the future of his company, but the future of his family. And somehow that seemed like a far heavier burden to bear. Dawn broke over the city with an unusual clarity, the morning sun painting the Montgomery Enterprises tower in shades of gold and amber. Richard stood at his penthouse windows, already, dressed in his finest suit, watching the early morning traffic build on the streets below. Behind him, Tommy sat at the breakfast table, methodically working his way through a plate of French toast while reviewing their strategy one final time. The eye. "Shareholders will start arriving at 9, the boy said, consulting the tablet beside his plate. "Michael's presentation is scheduled for 9:30, followed by the board's vote at 10. Richard nodded, adjusting his tie in the window's reflection. "And Elena?" "She'll be here early, ready to present her findings if necessary." Tommy hesitated. "But Mr. Montgomery, what if Michael has something else planned, something we don't know about?" Richard turned from the window, studying the boy who had become such an unexpected ally. He probably does. Michael's always been thorough in his planning, but sometimes the best defense isn't about knowing every move your opponent might make. It's about being ready to adapt when they make it. The intercom buzzed and Jennifer's voice came through. "Sir, Miss Blackwood has arrived. She's asking to speak with you privately before the meeting." "Send her up," Richard replied, then turned to Tommy. "Time to put on your game face, young man. The real work begins now." Elena Blackwood strode into the penthouse moments later, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, her normally composed features tight with concern. "Richard, we have a problem. Michael's team has been working through the night. They've prepared something, I'm not sure what, but Harrison Walsh looked far too confident when I saw him in the lobby." Richard gestured for her to sit. "Tell me everything you've observed." "They've been calling shareholders individually, focusing on the newer investors who don't know you personally. And," she pulled out her phone, showing them a confidential email, "they've hired Preston and Associates." "The crisis management firm?" Richard's eyebrows rose. Preston and Associates were known for handling high-profile corporate takeovers, specializing in swaying shareholder opinion through carefully orchestrated media campaigns. "They're planning to go public with their accusations," Elena confirmed. "If the board vote doesn't go their way, they'll take it to the media. They've already prepared press releases questioning your mental fitness, complete with carefully selected incidents taken out of context." Tommy, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. "But what about the quantum computing project? Once that's announced, they're going to try to discredit it," Richard realized, the pieces falling into place. "Paint it as evidence of erratic decision-making, a waste of company resources." He began pacing, his mind racing through possibilities. "They'll claim I'm gambling with shareholder value, pursuing personal obsessions instead of sound business strategy." Elena nodded grimly. "They've also been spreading rumors about your recent behavior, your sudden interest in a mysterious child, making major company decisions based on hunches, holding private meetings at odd hours." "Me," Tommy said quietly. "They're going to use me against you." Richard stopped pacing, his expression softening as he looked at the boy. "They can try, but they don't understand what they're dealing with." A knock at the door interrupted them. Jennifer entered, her face concerned. "Sir, the initial shareholders are arriving and there's something else. A woman is here, claiming to be Michael's wife. She's asking to speak with you urgently." Richard and Elena exchanged surprised looks. Sarah Montgomery was known for avoiding company politics entirely, preferring to focus on her charitable foundation. For her to show up now, send her up, Richard decided. "Tommy, perhaps you should wait in the study." But Tommy stood his ground. "No. If they're going to use me in their story, I should be part of writing it." Richard studied the boy's determined face and nodded slowly. "Very well, Elena, would you mind checking on the meeting preparations? I believe this needs to be a family conversation." Sarah Montgomery entered moments later, her elegant appearance barely masking her obvious distress. She stopped short at the sight of Tommy, confusion briefly crossing her features before she focused on her father-in-law. "Richard," she began, then seemed to struggle for words. I found something. In Michael's home office. I don't think... He knows I saw it, but..." She opened her designer handbag and withdrew a USB drive. "You need to see this before the meeting." Richard took the drive, noting how her hands trembled slightly. "What's on it?" "Evidence," she said quietly. "Of everything. How long he's been planning this, who he's been working with, where the money's really been going." She finally looked directly at Richard, her eyes glistening. "I knew he was ambitious, but this isn't ambition. This is obsession." Richard inserted the drive into his secure laptop, and the room fell silent as they reviewed its contents. With each document, each email, each recorded conversation, the full scope of Michael's plan became clear, and it was far more extensive than any of them had imagined. "He didn't just want the company," Tommy said, breaking the heavy silence. "He wanted to erase everything you built it on." Sarah's gaze shifted to the boy, curiosity overtaking her distress. "Who?" "A friend," Richard interrupted gently. "One who helped me see what was happening before it was too late." He checked his watch. "And speaking of time, we have 30 minutes until the meeting begins. Sarah, I know this isn't easy for you." "Do what you have to do," she said firmly. "The Michael I married, I don't recognize him anymore. Maybe this will help him find his way back." As Sarah left, Richard turned to Tommy. Still willing to stand with an old man against the storm? Tommy's response was to straighten his tie, a miniature version of Richard's own, and square his shoulders. "Always." Richard smiled, feeling a surge of pride that had nothing to do with business. "Then let's go show them what integrity really looks like." The main conference room of Montgomery Enterprises was designed to impress with its sweeping views of the city and state-of-the-art presentation technology. As shareholders filed in, the tension in the air was almost palpable. Richard stood near the entrance, greeting each arrival personally, his manner calm and assured despite the stakes at hand. Tommy, positioned discreetly near the refreshment table, observed the room with keen attention. He noticed Michael and Harrison Walsh huddled in the corner, their expressions tense as they whispered urgently. A team from Preston and Associates had set up their equipment, their sleek presentation materials waiting like loaded weapons. Eleanor moved through the crowd with practiced ease, engaging key shareholders in quiet conversations. Richard had given her full authority to share her findings, and she was making every moment count. The uncertain glances being cast toward Michael's group suggested her efforts were having an impact. At precisely 9:30, Richard called the meeting to order. The room settled into expectant silence as he took his place at the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and strong, "thank you for joining us this morning. We have several important matters to discuss, but first," he paused, making eye contact with various board members, "I believe my son has a presentation he'd like to share." Michael rose smoothly, adjusting his tie as he approached the podium. If he was surprised by his father's direct approach, he didn't show it. Behind him, the Preston and Associates team activated their displays, filling the screens with carefully crafted graphics. "Distinguished shareholders," Michael began, his voice carrying the polished confidence of countless corporate presentations. "We stand at a crucial moment in our company's history. The business landscape is changing rapidly, and we must change with it, or risk becoming obsolete." The presentation that followed was masterfully constructed. Michael wove a compelling narrative of a company at risk, supporting his arguments with selective data and expert opinions. The quantum computing project was portrayed as a dangerous gamble, a desperate attempt to recapture past glory at the expense of proven business opportunities. "My father built this company," Michael continued, his voice taking on a note of practiced concern. "His vision was revolutionary for its time. But times change and leadership must change with them. Recent decisions have raised serious concerns about the direction we're taking." The screens filled with charts showing apparent declines in key metrics, carefully manipulated to support Michael's narrative. Tommy watched the shareholders' reactions, noting the growing unease in their expressions. Even those who had seemed supportive of Richard earlier were beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats. "We have a responsibility," Michael pressed on, "to protect this company's future. That means making difficult decisions, including," he paused for effect, "acknowledging when it's time for new leadership." The room erupted in murmurs. This was it, the direct challenge they'd been expecting. Michael gestured to his legal team, who began distributing documents to the board members. Before you is a detailed proposal for restructuring company leadership, Michael announced, including an independent medical evaluation suggesting that my father's recent behavior indicates declining capacity for executive decision-making. Richard remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Tommy fought the urge to jump up, in protest, remembering their carefully planned strategy. Everything hinged on timing. Furthermore, Michael continued, gesturing to a new set of slides, we have evidence of concerning patterns in recent business decisions, unauthorized research, expenditures, suspicious personnel changes, and most recently, he pointed directly at Tommy, allowing an unidentified minor unrestricted access to confidential company areas. The room's attention shifted to Tommy, who met their stares with calm dignity. Richard had prepared him for this moment, and he knew his role perfectly. But before Michael could press his advantage, the conference room doors opened. Sarah Montgomery walked in, her head held high, followed by a team of people the shareholders instantly recognized, the lead scientists from the quantum computing division. Michael faltered mid-sentence, his confident facade cracking slightly. This wasn't part of his script. Richard stood slowly, his movement drawing all eyes. Thank you, Michael, for that interesting perspective. Now, if you'll allow me, I believe it's time for a different kind of presentation. He nodded to Tommy, who activated a new set of displays, one about the true future of Montgomery Enterprises and the difference between innovation and manipulation. The quantum computing team's lead scientist stepped forward, and the screens filled with real-time data from their latest breakthrough. The atmosphere in the room began to shift, but this was just the beginning. Richard had weathered enough corporate battles to know that the real fight was only just starting. The quantum computing presentation unfolded like a masterfully orchestrated symphony. Dr. Amanda Chen, the project's lead scientist, commanded the room's attention with the quiet confidence of someone who had revolutionized their field. Behind her, the screens displayed real-time demonstrations of breakthrough technology that left even the most skeptical shareholders leaning forward, in their seats. What you're seeing, Dr. Chen explained, is not just theoretical potential. This is functional quantum processing at room temperature, something our competitors said wouldn't be possible for another decade. She gestured to a live feed from the research lab. We achieved stable quantum coherence 3 weeks ago. The implications for everything from financial modeling to artificial intelligence are beyond anything currently available. Michael stood at the back of the room, his expression darkening as he watched his carefully constructed narrative begin to unravel. Harrison Walsh was frantically typing on his tablet, likely trying to reconcile these revelations with their prepared counter-arguments. But perhaps, Richard said, rising to join Dr. Chen at the podium, we should address the broader question of leadership and vision. He turned to face the shareholders directly. My son has suggested that I'm out of touch with modern business realities, that my leadership style is obsolete. Tommy watched as Richard moved away from the podium, walking slowly among the assembled shareholders. It was a technique the boy had seen him practice the night before, making each person feel personally addressed. Leadership isn't about following trends, Richard continued. It's about seeing possibilities others miss. When I started this company, everyone said personal computers were a fad. When we moved into mobile technology, they said we were too late to the market. And now, he gestured to the quantum computing display, they say quantum computing is a pipe dream. Sarah Montgomery stood up, drawing all eyes. If I may speak. At Richard's nod, she moved to the center of the room. I've been silent about company matters for years, believing it wasn't my place to interfere. But what I've discovered recently, she pulled out the USB drive, holding it up. This contains evidence of a systematic campaign to undermine not just Richard's leadership, but the very principles this company was built on. Michael stepped forward, his voice tight. Sarah, I'm sorry, Michael. She cut him off, her voice firm. But this has to stop. She turned to address the room. The documents you were given about Richard's supposed mental decline? They were fabricated. The financial reports showing declining performance manipulated. I know because I found the original versions, along with emails detailing exactly how they were to be altered. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Elena. Blackwood quickly stood, adding her voice to Sarah's. I can confirm this. As head of institutional investment, I conducted my own investigation when I noticed discrepancies. What Mrs. Montgomery says is absolutely true. Harrison Walsh started edging toward the door, but Richard's security team was already in position. Tommy couldn't help but feel a twist of satisfaction at seeing the man's confident demeanor crumble. Furthermore, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, the quantum computing project isn't just real. It's been deliberately hidden from many of you. Why? Because its success would have made this takeover attempt impossible. Michael surged forward. This is ridiculous. You're all being manipulated by an old man who can't accept that his time has passed. Look at the evidence we presented. Fabricated evidence. Tommy's clear voice cut through the chaos. All eyes turned to him as he stood, tablet in hand. Would you like me to show everyone the real numbers, Mr. Michael? The ones you didn't alter? Who is this child? One of the senior board members demanded. Richard smiled. This is Tommy, and he has quite a story to tell about overhearing certain conversations in Maxwell's coffee house, conversations that never should have happened in public. Tommy stepped forward, his young face serious as he addressed the shareholders. I heard them planning everything, how they would change the numbers, how they would make Mr. Montgomery look unstable, how they would hide the quantum project's success until after they had taken control. You expect us to believe the word of some random street kid, Michael scoffed, but his voice held a note of desperation. No, Richard replied calmly. I expect them to believe the evidence. He nodded to Tommy, who activated a new display. You see, Tommy wasn't just listening. He was recording. The color drained from Michael's face as his own voice filled the room, discussing the details of his plan with Harrison Walsh. The recording was crystal clear, leaving no room for denial or misinterpretation. But Richard wasn't finished. With a gesture to Dr. Chen, he revealed their final card. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let me show you exactly what the future of Montgomery Enterprises looks like, and why some people were so desperate to seize control before this became public knowledge. As Dr. Chen began demonstrating the full capabilities of their quantum system, Tommy caught sight of Michael sagging into a chair, the fight finally draining from his expression. The tide had turned, but the boy couldn't help wondering what the cost would be to this family that had already lost so much. The aftermath of the revelations swept through the conference room like a tidal wave. Board members who had been skeptical of Richard's leadership just hours before were now falling over themselves to express their continued confidence. Harrison Walsh had been quietly escorted from the building, his access credentials revoked. The Preston and Associates team was hastily packing up their equipment, their carefully crafted narrative of corporate crisis now useless. But it was Michael who commanded the most attention. He sat alone at the conference table, staring at his reflection in its polished surface, the weight of his actions visible in the slump of his shoulders. Sarah stood nearby, her expression a complex mixture of disappointment and concern. As the shareholders filed out, many stopping to congratulate Richard or express their amazement at the quantum computing breakthrough, Tommy noticed something unexpected in the older man's eyes, not triumph but sadness. Mr. Montgomery, Tommy said quietly, are you okay? Richard placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. Victory doesn't always feel the way we expect it to, son. The room had nearly emptied when Michael finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. How long did you know? Long enough, Richard replied, moving to sit across from his son. The real question is, how long have you been so angry with me that this seemed like your only option? Michael looked up, his carefully maintained facade cracking completely. You never saw me, did you? Always too busy with the company, with your grand vision. I was just the heir apparent, the one who had to live up to the great Richard Montgomery's legacy. Michael, Sarah interjected, but he waved her off. No, let me finish. He turned back to his father. Do you know what it's like? Growing up in your shadow? Every achievement measured against yours, every decision questioned because it wasn't What you would have done? Richard was quiet for a moment, studying his son's face. I thought I was preparing you for the responsibility, teaching you what you needed to know. You were teaching me how to be you, Michael shot back. But I'm not you, father, I never was. Tommy, who had been silently observing, suddenly spoke up. But that's why he chose you. Both men turned to look at him, surprised. What do you mean? Michael asked, genuine curiosity breaking through his bitterness. Tommy stepped forward, his young face serious. It's the quantum project. It's not about copying what's been done before. It's about seeing things differently. Just like when Mr. Montgomery started the company, he succeeded because he didn't do things the way everyone else did. Richard's eyes widened slightly as he caught the boy's meaning. He's right, Michael. I didn't want you to be me. I wanted you to be better than me. To see opportunities I couldn't see. To take the company places I never imagined. Then why didn't you trust me with the quantum project? Michael demanded. Because you stopped trusting yourself, Sarah answered softly, moving to stand beside her husband. You became so focused on proving yourself that you stopped seeing what was right in front of you. A heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, the morning sun had climbed higher, bathing the city in bright light. The contrast between the glittering exterior of their corporate world and the raw emotions now exposed was striking. What happens now? Michael finally asked, his voice hollow. Richard leaned forward, his expression softening. That depends. On you, son. The board will demand consequences. There's no avoiding that, but how we handle this as a family, that's a different matter. A family? Michael laughed bitterly. Look at us, father. Look what we've become. I am looking, Richard replied quietly. I'm seeing things I should have seen years ago. Mistakes I made, words I should have said. He glanced at Tommy, drawing strength from the boy's unwavering support. But it's never too late to start fixing things if you're willing to try. Sarah moved to touch Michael's shoulder, and for the first time that morning, he didn't pull away. Tommy watched the subtle shift in the family dynamic, understanding that he was witnessing something both painful and necessary, the first steps toward healing. The board meeting will reconvene in an hour, Richard said, standing slowly. We have some difficult decisions to make, but first, he looked at his son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. I think you and I need to have an honest conversation. No agendas, no corporate strategies, just a father and son who've lost their way. As Richard and Michael left the conference room together, Tommy felt Sarah's hand on his shoulder. Thank you, she said softly, for helping us see what we were all too close to notice. Tommy smiled up at her. Sometimes it takes an outsider to show us what's been inside all along. Through the conference room windows, they could see father and son walking slowly toward Richard's office, their shadows merging in the morning light. The future was uncertain, but at least now it would be built on truth rather than deception, on understanding rather than assumption. And for Tommy, watching this family begin its journey toward reconciliation, it was a powerful reminder that true wealth wasn't measured in corporate assets or stock prices, but in the courage to face hard truths and the strength to begin again. The hour before the board reconvened felt like an eternity to Tommy, who waited in Richard's penthouse office with Sarah. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see scattered clouds casting moving shadows across the city, a fitting metaphor for the changing dynamics below. You know, Sarah said, breaking the contemplative silence, in all the years I've been part of this family, I've never seen anyone reach both Richard and Michael the way you have. She studied Tommy with newfound curiosity. There's something special about you, young man. Tommy shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the most special thing of all. Sarah moved to a sleek cabinet and pulled out a photo album, something surprisingly traditional for such a modern space. Would you like to see something? She opened the album to reveal a photograph of a much younger Richard and Michael. They were in what looked like a garage workshop, both covered in grease and grinning at the camera. Michael couldn't have been more than 12. This was taken the summer they built their first computer together, Sarah explained. Michael missed his Little League championship game to finish it. He said baseball could wait. This was more important. Tommy studied the photo, noting the pride in both their faces. What happened? Life, success, the constant pressure of running a global company. Sarah turned another page, showing the gradual progression of their relationship through the years. The smiles became more formal, the spontaneous moments fewer. Richard wanted to give Michael everything he never had growing up, but somewhere along the way, he forgot to give him what he did have, Tommy finished quietly, like that workshop time. Sarah looked at him sharply. Exactly. You understand? More than most adults I know. Their conversation was interrupted by Richard's private elevator arriving. Both Richard and Michael stepped out, their expressions thoughtful but no longer hostile. Something had shifted between them during their private talk. The board is waiting, Richard announced, though he seemed in no hurry to head down. Instead, he walked to his desk and pulled out an old leather journal. But first, I want to share something with all of you. He opened the journal carefully, its pages worn with age. This is from the day I started the company. I wrote, "Today, I begin building something that will outlast me. Not just a business, but a legacy of innovation and integrity. Something my children can be proud of, not because of its success, but because of how we achieved that success." Michael moved closer, his eyes fixed on the journal. "I've never seen this before." "No, you haven't," Richard admitted. "I've kept it private all these years, thinking it was just my personal reminder. But maybe that was another mistake." He looked at his son directly. "You said I never saw you, Michael, but the truth is I saw too much of myself in you. I was so focused on protecting you from my mistakes that I didn't let you make your own." "Father," Michael began, but Richard held up a hand. "Let me finish. The quantum computing project, it wasn't just about new technology. It was about proving that Montgomery Enterprises could still innovate, still take bold risks. But I realized something this morning, watching you in that meeting." "What's that?" Michael asked quietly. "That I've been running this company like it's still in that garage, making all the decisions, keeping all the secrets, trying to control everything." Richard closed the journal. "That has to change." Sarah moved to stand beside her husband. "What are you suggesting?" "A new structure, one that recognizes the need for both experience and fresh perspectives." Richard turned to Michael. "The board will demand consequences for what happened, and rightly so. But they also need to understand that this company's future depends on change." Tommy watched as understanding dawned on Michael's face. "You're not stepping down?" "No," Richard smiled slightly. "But I am stepping back. The quantum computing division needs someone who understands both the technology and the market. Someone who can bridge the gap between innovation and implementation." "You want me to run it?" Michael's voice held equal parts surprise and skepticism. "I want you to earn it," Richard corrected. "Starting from the ground up, working with the development team, proving yourself not to me, but to yourself." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And in time, if you show you've learned from this, there's no reason you can't earn back everything else too." The tension in Michael's shoulders, present for so long it had seemed permanent, began to ease. "Starting over. Starting fresh," Richard amended, "with clear eyes and honest hearts." He looked around at all of them, his son, his daughter-in-law, and the remarkable boy who had helped bring them to this moment. "What do you say?" Before Michael could answer, Tommy spoke up. "Can I go down to the lab sometimes too? I want to learn about quantum computing." The unexpected question broke the heavy moment, causing everyone to laugh. Richard's eyes twinkled as he looked at the boy. "I think that could be arranged. After all, every great company needs fresh perspectives." As they prepared to face the board, Tommy caught a glimpse of their reflections in the window. The established businessman, the son seeking redemption, the supportive wife, and the street-smart boy who had somehow brought them all together. They made an unlikely family, but perhaps that was what made it work. The board meeting that followed was unlike any in Montgomery Enterprises history. Instead of the expected executive execution, the shareholders witnessed something far more powerful: a family and a company choosing transformation over destruction. Richard stood before the assembled board members, his presence commanding, as ever, but with a new quality of openness that many had never seen before. "Ladies and gentlemen, this morning we witnessed an attempt to change the leadership of this company through deception that cannot and will not be ignored." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation settle over the room. "However, we also witnessed something else. A revelation about how we've been operating, about the walls we've built between innovation and implementation, between experience and fresh ideas." Michael sat quietly in the front row, his posture straight but humble, Sarah beside him, her hand resting supportively on his arm. Tommy had been given a special seat near Richard's podium, his presence a reminder of how truth could come from unexpected sources. "I am proposing a restructuring of Montgomery Enterprises," Richard continued. "Not the one you were presented with earlier, but one that will genuinely prepare us for the future." He gestured to the screens where a new organizational chart appeared. "The quantum computing division will become a separate subsidiary with its own board and leadership structure. This will allow for more focused development while protecting our core business." The shareholders leaned forward, their interest peaked. The quantum computing breakthrough had already generated significant buzz in the financial markets. "As for leadership," Richard's voice softened slightly, "Michael Montgomery will join the quantum computing team, not as an executive, but as a project coordinator. He will work directly with our development teams, learning the technology from the ground up." Murmurs filled the room. This was not the harsh punishment many had expected, but neither was it a mere slap on the wrist. It was something else entirely, a chance for redemption through genuine contribution. "Mr. Montgomery," one of the senior board members spoke, "while we appreciate the gesture after this morning's revelations—" "I understand your concerns," Richard interrupted smoothly, "which is why all major decisions in the quantum division will require joint approval from both the subsidiary board and the main board. Trust, once broken, must be rebuilt carefully." Michael stood up, his voice clear and steady. "If I may address the board." At Richard's nod, he turned to face the shareholders. "I won't insult you by trying to justify my actions. What I did was wrong. Not just professionally, but personally. I lost sight of what this company truly stands for, what my father built it to be." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm not asking for your trust. I'm asking for the opportunity to earn it back one day at a time, through real work and genuine contribution to this company's future." Tommy watched the room's reaction, noting how Michael's humility seemed to affect even his strongest critics. The boy had seen enough of life to know that genuine remorse was rare, especially among the powerful. Richard resumed his presentation, outlining the technical details of the restructuring. The quantum computing breakthrough would be announced publicly the next day, along with the new organizational structure. The market response was expected to be overwhelmingly positive. "Finally," Richard said, approaching the end of his presentation, "I want to address the question of succession." The room grew absolutely still. "It remains my intention to eventually step down as CEO. But that transition will happen naturally, through a process of genuine preparation and earned trust, not through manipulation or forced timing." He looked directly at Michael. "The future leadership of this company will be determined by demonstrated ability, ethical behavior, and a true understanding of what Montgomery Enterprises stands for. Whether that leader is named Montgomery or not is far less important than their commitment to our core values." The board's vote on the restructuring plan was nearly unanimous. As the meeting concluded, shareholders approached Michael one by one, some offering words of encouragement, others expressing cautious optimism about his new role. Sarah found Tommy watching the proceedings from a quiet corner. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how sometimes fixing something that's broken can make it stronger than it was before," he replied thoughtfully. Sarah smiled, recognizing the wisdom in his words. "You know, we never properly thanked you for what you did." Tommy shrugged. "Mr. Montgomery gave me a chance when nobody else would. I just did the same for him." Across the room, Richard and Michael were engaged in what appeared to be their first, genuinely relaxed conversation in years. They were discussing the quantum computing project, with Michael asking detailed technical questions that showed he'd been paying more attention than anyone realized. "You know," Sarah said, watching her. "Husband and father-in-law, families are a lot like quantum computers. Everything looks complicated and impossible to understand from the outside, but somehow when you get the right elements in place, it all starts working together in amazing ways." Tommy grinned. "Does that make me a quantum particle?" "Maybe," she laughed, "one that helped realign our whole system." As the boardroom slowly emptied, the Montgomery family, now unexpectedly expanded by one observant young boy, stood together at the windows, looking out at the city they would continue to help shape. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while it held the promise of something better than mere success. It held the promise of redemption, understanding, and growth. And for Tommy, who had started this journey as a hidden observer in a coffee shop, it held something even more precious, the promise of belonging. The announcement of Montgomery Enterprises' quantum computing breakthrough sent shockwaves through the tech industry. As predicted, the company's stock price soared, but the real transformation was happening inside the company's walls, far from the public eye. 1 month after the fateful board meeting, the quantum computing division had taken shape in a newly renovated floor of the Montgomery building. The space was designed to foster collaboration, with open workspaces, cutting-edge laboratories, and most surprisingly to many employees, a classroom-style learning center where Michael Montgomery could often be found, taking notes alongside junior developers. Tommy, true to his word, had become a regular presence in the lab after his school hours. Richard had arranged for him to attend the city's best private school, but the boy's real education seemed to happen in the afternoons, when he absorbed quantum computing concepts with an enthusiasm that amazed even the senior scientists. "Sure, kids got a natural intuition for it," Dr. Chen remarked to Richard one afternoon, watching Tommy work through a complex problem set. "He sees patterns that some of our PhDs miss." Richard nodded, but his attention was drawn to another figure in the lab. Michael was at a workstation, sleeves rolled up, deeply engaged in discussion with a team of engineers. The change in his son over the past month had been remarkable. "How's he doing?" Richard asked Dr. Sohm. Chen quietly. "Honestly, better than I expected," she smiled. "He's not afraid to admit what he doesn't know, and he works twice as hard as anyone else to learn it. The team respects that." Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's arrival. She'd taken a more active role in the company since the restructuring, helping to reshape their corporate social responsibility initiatives. "The education outreach program is ready to launch," she announced, her eyes bright with excitement. "We're going to start offering quantum computing workshops to underprivileged schools across the city." "Tommy's idea?" Richard guessed. "Partly," Sarah admitted. "He pointed out that there might be other kids like him out there, ones who just need a chance to show what they can do." Richard watched as Tommy walked over to Michael's workstation, pointing something out on the screen. His son listened intently, then nodded, making a correction to his calculations. The sight of them working together so naturally still amazed him. "You know," Sarah said softly, "I always worried that this company would tear our family apart. I never imagined it could bring us closer together." Later that afternoon, Richard called a small meeting in his office. Michael and Tommy arrived. Together, deep in discussion about quantum entanglement principles, Sarah joined them, bringing the preliminary designs for the education program. "I wanted to share something with you," Richard began, pulling out his old journal. "I've been adding to it recently, thinking about the future." He opened to the page, where new entries stood out against the aged paper. "Today I witnessed something extraordinary," he read aloud. "Not in our laboratories or our stock prices, but in the simple act of people learning to trust again. My son, who I feared I had lost to ambition, has found his way back through humility and genuine curiosity. A boy who started as a stranger has become family, teaching us all about the power of truth and second chances." Michael shifted in his chair, emotion flickering across his face. "Father, let me finish," Richard said gently. "I realize now that innovation isn't just about technology. It's about being willing to see things differently, to admit when we're wrong, and to embrace unexpected possibilities." Montgomery. Enterprises was built on that principle, and now, thanks to these unexpected circumstances, we're living it again. Tommy spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "Like quantum superposition, multiple states existing simultaneously until we make an observation." "Exactly," Richard smiled. "We had to observe ourselves honestly before we could move forward." He closed the journal and looked at each of them in turn. "Which brings me to why I called you here. I have a proposal." Sarah leaned forward, recognizing the tone her father-in-law used when he had something significant in mind. "The education program is just the beginning," Richard continued. "I want to create a foundation, the Montgomery Initiative for Innovation and Opportunity. Its mission will be to identify and support young people who show promise in technology and science, regardless of their background." Michael's eyes lit up with understanding. "Like a quantum leap for education?" "Precisely, and I want all of you to be part of it." Richard turned to Tommy. "Especially you, young man. Your perspective will be crucial in helping us understand how to reach kids who might otherwise be overlooked." Tommy sat straighter in his chair. "Really? You want my help?" "More than that," Richard smiled. "I want you to be our first success story. You've already proven what's possible when talent meets opportunity. Now let's help others do the same." The sun was setting outside, painting the city in shades of gold and purple. In the gathering dusk, the Montgomery building's windows glowed like beacons, each light representing someone working to push the boundaries of what was possible. "So," Richard asked, looking at his unconventional but beloved family, "shall we begin?" The seasons changed, and with them, Montgomery Enterprises transformed. The Quantum Computing Division, under its unique hybrid leadership structure, had become a powerhouse of innovation. Michael's journey from the ground up had given him insights that proved invaluable in bridging the gap between technical brilliance and practical application. One crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the restructuring, Tommy stood at the podium in the company's main auditorium, addressing the first group of students selected for the Montgomery Initiative's pilot program. At 13, he'd grown taller, and his once shabby appearance had been replaced by quiet confidence. "When I first walked into Maxwell's coffee house," he began, looking out at the sea of young faces, "I was looking for shelter. What I found instead was possibility. That's what we want to offer all of you. Not just shelter from life's storms, but the tools to build something amazing." In the front row, Richard sat with Michael and Sarah, watching with pride as Tommy commanded the attention of students, teachers, and press alike. The initiative's launch had garnered significant media attention, but its real impact could be seen in the eyes of the 30 students selected for the program, kids from diverse backgrounds who shared the same spark of potential that Richard had first seen in Tommy. After the presentation, the students were given tours of the quantum computing labs. Dr. Chen and her team had prepared special demonstrations, making complex concepts accessible through interactive displays and hands-on experiments. "It's amazing," Michael said to his father as they watched the students cluster around a quantum simulation display. "Some of these kids already grasp concepts that took me months to understand." "That's because you're teaching them differently," Richard replied. "You learned from your own journey, starting from scratch, asking basic questions, admitting what you don't know. It makes you a better teacher." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad things happened the way they did. Not the deception part," he added quickly, "but the reset, learning everything from the ground up. It's given me a whole new appreciation for what we do here." Sarah joined them, having just finished speaking with a group of parents. You should see their faces when they realize their children will have access to this level of education and technology. One mother started crying. She said her daughter had been taking apart computers since she was 5, but they could never afford to nurture her talent. Richard watched as Tommy moved among the students, answering questions and offering encouragement. The boy had an innate ability to connect with others who, like him, had faced significant challenges in life. "You know," Richard said, "when I started this company, I thought success meant creating the most advanced technology. Now I realize it's about creating possibilities." The day continued with workshops and mentoring sessions. Michael led a discussion on quantum programming basics, his natural teaching ability shining through as he broke down complex concepts into understandable pieces. Dr. Chen demonstrated the practical applications of quantum computing in fields ranging from medicine to climate science. Later, in Richard's office, the family gathered for their now regular evening meeting. Tommy had brought one of the students with him, a girl named Maria, who had shown exceptional insight during the quantum programming session. "Mr. Montgomery," Maria said shyly, "I have an idea for the initiative. What if we created a peer mentoring program? Students who excel in one area could help others who are struggling, and we could all learn from each other." Richard glanced at Tommy, who was beaming with pride at his new friend's suggestion. "I think that's an excellent idea, Maria. In fact," he pulled out his journal, which now contained as many future plans as past memories. "Let's discuss how we could implement that." As they talked, the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the office windows. But unlike the shadows of the past, these were filled with promise rather than secrets. The quantum computing screens displayed endless possibilities, much like the future stretching out before them. "You know what this reminds me of?" Tommy said suddenly, looking around at the family that had adopted him in all but name. "Quantum entanglement. Once particles become entangled, they remain connected no matter how far apart they are. Their states are linked forever." Michael laughed. "Are you saying we're all quantumly entangled now?" "Maybe we are," Sarah smiled. "Connected by something stronger than blood or business, by choice and understanding." Richard looked at his expanded family, his son who had found his way back through humility and hard work, his daughter-in-law whose strength had helped hold them together, and the remarkable boy who had started it all. Each of them had chosen to be here, to be part of this new chapter in the Montgomery story. "Quantum entanglement," he mused. "I like that. It means no matter what challenges come our way, we're connected. We face them together." As evening settled, over the city, the lights of the Montgomery building shone bright against the darkening sky. Inside, a family continued planning for the future, their bond strengthened by the very crisis that had threatened to tear them apart. And somewhere in the quantum realm, particles danced their eternal dance, proving that in both science and life, the most powerful connections are the ones we choose to nurture. 1 year had passed since the day Tommy first entered Maxwell's coffee house. The familiar corner booth where everything began was now occupied by a very different scene. Richard, Michael, Sarah, and Tommy sat together, sharing breakfast and planning the upcoming expansion of the Montgomery initiative. "The results from the first year are beyond our expectations," Sarah reported, sliding a tablet across the table. 97% retention rate in the program, and 3 of our students have already filed provisional patents for their innovations. Michael studied the data with pride. "Maria's quantum encryption protocol is particularly impressive. Some of our senior engineers think it could revolutionize secure communications." "Speaking of Maria," Tommy added, "she's organized a peer mentoring network that's spread to 5 other schools. They're calling it the Quantum Network." Richard listened to them with quiet satisfaction, noting how naturally they worked together now. The past year had transformed them from a fractured family into a cohesive team, each member contributing their unique strengths to their shared mission. "I've been thinking," Richard said, setting down his coffee cup. "It's time to take the next step in our company's evolution." The others looked at him expectantly. They had learned that when Richard Montgomery got that particular gleam in his eye, something significant was about to happen. "The quantum computing division has exceeded all projections," he continued. "But more importantly, the way it's been managed, the combination of experienced leadership and fresh perspectives, the integration of education and innovation, it's shown us a new way forward." Michael leaned forward, understanding beginning to dawn. "You want to restructure the entire company along similar lines?" Not just restructure, Richard smiled. Reimagine. Every division would have its own educational component, its own outreach program. We'd create pathways for young innovators to move from the initiative into real-world projects. A complete integration of business and social impact, Sarah mused, breaking down the walls between corporate success and community benefit. Tommy, who had been quietly contemplating, suddenly spoke up. Like the quantum principle of superposition, every part of the company existing in multiple states simultaneously. Business and education, profit and purpose, experience and innovation. Exactly, Richard beamed at the boy who had grown so much in understanding over the past year. And speaking of multiple states, I have an announcement to make. He pulled out his ever-present journal, now accompanied by a newer volume. I've been keeping 2 sets of notes lately, one for the present and one for the future. He opened the newer journal to a carefully marked page. This is my plan for the next phase of Montgomery Enterprises, and this time, I want all of you to help write it. The family spent the next hour in animated discussion, their breakfast growing cold as they explored possibilities. Michael's technical insights, tempered by his hard-earned humility, complemented Sarah's understanding of social impact. Tommy's fresh perspective helped them see opportunities they might have missed, while Richard's experience helped shape their ideas into practical strategies. As the morning crowd thinned, a young girl approached their table, her eyes wide with recognition. She was wearing the Montgomery Initiative uniform, a subtle but proud symbol of her participation in the program. Mr. Montgomery, she addressed Tommy, clutching a tablet. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you. Your speech at last week's quantum programming workshop. It helped me understand everything differently. Tommy smiled warmly. That's exactly how it worked for me too. Sometimes we just need someone to show us a new way of looking at things. He glanced meaningfully at Richard. Would you like to join us? We're actually discussing some new ideas for the program. The girl's face lit up as she pulled up a chair. Richard watched with pride as Tommy drew her into the conversation, demonstrating the same gift for mentorship that had helped transform their family. You know, Michael said quietly to his father, a year ago I thought I knew exactly what this company needed. I was so focused on taking control that I couldn't see the real opportunities right in front of us. We all have our blind spots, Richard replied. The trick is learning to trust others to help us see past them. Sarah reached for her husband's hand under the table, a gesture of support that had become natural over months of working together. The company's stronger now than it ever was, not just financially, but in its foundation, its purpose. As they continued their discussion, incorporating the young students' eager suggestions, Richard looked around the coffee shop that had witnessed so many pivotal moments in their journey. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting everything in a warm, hopeful light. In his mind, he could still see Tommy standing there that first morning, brave enough to speak truth to power. Now, a year later, that same courage had rippled out, touching countless lives through the initiative and transforming his own family in ways he never could have imagined. The future stretching before them was bright with possibility, not just for Montgomery Enterprises, but for every young innovator who would find their way through the doors that were now opening. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come not from the technology we create, but from the connections we forge and the chances we take on each other. The Montgomery Enterprises annual shareholders meeting looked very different from the tense confrontation of the previous year. The main auditorium was filled not just with investors and executives, but with students from the initiative, their families, and community partners who had become integral to the company's new vision. Richard stood at the podium, Michael and Tommy flanking him on either side. The image of the 3 generations of Montgomery leadership, one by blood, one by choice, but both equally committed to the company's future, sent a powerful message about the transformation they'd undergone. A year ago, Richard began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed room, we stood here at a crossroads. Today we stand here at a launching point. He gestured to the screens behind him, where images of the initiative's successes played in a silent slideshow. Montgomery Enterprises has always been about innovation, But we've learned that true innovation comes in many forms. Michael stepped forward to present the technical achievements of the past year. The quantum computing division had exceeded all expectations with breakthrough applications in healthcare, environmental protection, and data security. But it was his description of how these advances were being integrated with educational programs that really captured the audience's attention. Every technical achievement you see here, Michael explained, has been influenced by our student participants. Their fresh perspectives, their unfettered thinking, their courage to question established methods, these have become our greatest assets. Sarah, seated in the front row with Elena Blackwood, nodded in satisfaction. The shareholders' faces showed not just approval of the financial success, but genuine appreciation for the deeper changes in the company's culture. Then it was Tommy's turn to speak. At 14, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that belied his age. When I first came to Montgomery Enterprises, I thought I was just sharing information. What I found instead was a family. Not just the Montgomerys, who took me in, but a larger family of innovators, dreamers, and builders. He turned to gesture at the students in the audience. Look around this room. Every person here represents a possibility, a potential breakthrough waiting to happen. That's what the Montgomery Initiative is about, not just finding talent, but nurturing it, challenging it, and giving it room to grow. Richard watched with pride as Tommy continued, describing the peer mentoring program, the community outreach efforts, and the ways in which the initiative had grown beyond its original scope. The boy who had once lived on the streets was now helping to shape the future of one of the world's leading technology companies. As the presentation concluded, Richard returned to the podium for the final announcement. Today, we're not just celebrating our past achievements. We're launching the next phase of Montgomery Enterprises' evolution. He unveiled the new organizational structure, showing how each division would integrate education, innovation, and social impact. But perhaps the most significant announcement, Richard continued, is about leadership. He paused, looking out at the assembled crowd. As many of you know, I've been considering succession plans for some time. Today, I'm pleased to announce a new leadership model for Montgomery Enterprises. The room grew quiet with anticipation. Michael straightened slightly, his expression a mix of curiosity and newfound humility. Effective immediately, we will be implementing a collaborative leadership structure. Michael Montgomery will assume the role of Chief Innovation Officer, overseeing all technical divisions while continuing his hands-on work with our development teams. Michael's surprise was evident. This was not the traditional CEO role he had once coveted, but something potentially more meaningful. Sarah Montgomery will become our Chief Impact Officer, expanding her work with the initiative and integrating our social responsibility efforts across all divisions. Sarah's smile was bright with possibility as she squeezed Elena's hand in excitement. And, Richard continued, I'm pleased to announce that Tommy Wheeler will be joining our junior board of directors, ensuring that the perspective that helped transform our company continues to guide our future. The applause was spontaneous and genuine. Tommy's journey from street-smart observer to respected voice in the company's leadership had become a symbol of everything Montgomery Enterprises now stood for. As for myself, Richard concluded, I'll be taking on the role of executive chairman, focusing on long-term strategy and mentorship. Because if this year has taught us anything, it's that the best leaders are those who never stop learning. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for the announcements or the company's success. It was for the story of transformation they had all witnessed, a story of family, redemption, and the power of giving everyone a chance to prove their worth. As the applause continued, Richard looked at his expanded family standing together on the stage. They had come full circle from that tense morning in Maxwell's coffee house, but the journey had taken them somewhere far better than any of them had imagined. In the front row, Maria, now one of the initiative's star students, was already scribbling notes, probably planning the next innovation she would bring to their quantum computing team. Around her, other students watched with shining eyes, seeing their own possibilities reflected in the story unfolding before them. The future of Montgomery Enterprises was no longer about one man's vision or one family's legacy. It had become something larger, a quantum field of possibilities, where every person's potential could entangle with others to create something greater than the sum of its parts. The news of Montgomery Enterprises' revolutionary restructuring spread through the business world like wildfire. What had started as a family drama had evolved into a case study in corporate transformation, attracting attention from industry leaders and academics alike. 1 month after the shareholders' meeting, the company hosted its first Global Innovation Summit. The Montgomery Building's grand atrium had been transformed into a showcase of technology and human potential, with presentations from both seasoned engineers and initiative students running simultaneously. Tommy, fresh from his first junior board meeting, stood with Richard at the entrance, greeting attendees from technology companies around the world. His initiative badge now shared space with a discreet board member pin, symbols of how far he'd come. "Did you ever imagine this when you first walked into Maxwell's?" Richard asked quietly during a lull in arrivals. Tommy smiled, adjusting his tie, a habit he'd picked up from Richard. "Not even close. I was just trying to do the right thing. Sometimes that's all it takes to change the world," Richard replied, watching as Michael led a group of international executives through a demonstration of their latest quantum breakthrough. The demonstration area was a testament to their new approach. Instead of traditional corporate presentations, each innovation was showcased through the lens of its real-world impact. Initiative students worked alongside senior engineers, explaining complex concepts with fresh perspective and enthusiasm. Sarah had orchestrated this aspect of the summit, insisting that every technological achievement be paired with its human story. At one station, Maria was explaining how her quantum encryption protocol had been inspired by her grandmother's experience with identity theft. At another, a team of initiative students demonstrated a quantum-powered environmental monitoring system they'd developed for their local community. "Mr. Wheeler," a voice called out. Tommy turned to find Dr. Chen approaching with a group of university professors. "Would you mind sharing your perspective on the peer mentoring program? These educators are interested in implementing similar models." As Tommy stepped away to join the discussion, Richard noticed Michael watching from across the atrium. His son's expression held none of the jealousy or resentment that might have once been there, only pride and genuine appreciation for the young man's contributions. "He's a natural leader," Michael said, joining his father. "Different style than either of us, but maybe that's exactly what we needed." Richard nodded. The best leaders don't try to replicate what came before. They find their own way to move things forward. Their conversation was interrupted by excited murmurs from the main demonstration area. Maria's team had just successfully tested a new application of their encryption protocol, achieving results that even the senior engineers hadn't thought possible. "You know what this reminds me of?" Michael mused, watching the celebration. "That summer, we spent building computers in the garage. Remember how excited we'd get when something finally worked?" "I remember," Richard smiled. "You had that same look Maria has now, like you could see possibilities nobody else could even imagine." "We lost that somewhere along the way, didn't we? Got so caught up in running the business that we forgot why we started it in the first place." Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Maybe. But look around. We found it again, and this time we're sharing it with others." The summit continued into the evening, with roundtable discussions and workshops, bringing together diverse perspectives from across the technology sector. But it was the impromptu moments that truly showcased the company's transformation. A veteran engineer earnestly taking notes, while a teenage student explained a novel approach to quantum entanglement, or a group of international executives brainstorming with initiative participants about applications in their home countries. Sarah found Richard observing it all from the mezzanine level. "The Harvard Business Review wants to do a case study," she informed him. "They're calling it the Montgomery Revolution, how a family crisis led to a new model of corporate innovation." "What do you think about that?" Richard asked, curious about her perspective. "I think they're missing the point," she replied thoughtfully. "This isn't about corporate innovation, it's about human potential. We just created the space for it to flourish." Below them, Tommy was now engaged in an animated discussion with a group of initiative students and corporate leaders, his natural ability to bridge different worlds evident in how he moved between technical concepts and practical applications. No, Sarah continued. When Michael first told me about the company's succession plans years ago, I worried it would tear us apart. I never imagined it would end up expanding our family instead. Richard watched as Michael joined Tommy's discussion, the two of them seamlessly building on each other's ideas. The quantum computing displays behind them cast ever-changing patterns of light across the atrium, a fitting backdrop for a company that had learned to embrace uncertainty and possibility. That's the thing about family, Richard replied. Sometimes it finds you when you least expect it and teaches you things you never knew you needed to learn. As the evening drew to a close, the atrium slowly emptied, leaving behind an atmosphere charged with possibility. The summit had accomplished more than just showcasing technology. It had demonstrated a new way of thinking about progress, innovation, and the relationships that drive them both. Tomorrow, these ideas would begin spreading to other companies, other institutions, creating ripples of change that would extend far beyond Montgomery Enterprises. But for now, in the quiet of the settling evening, a transformed family stood together, marveling at how one act of courage had set in motion something larger than any of them had imagined.